Hello, hello. This is the great Johannes speaking, Johannes Conrad. So let's just randomly talk about the nature of our reality and the consequence it has for our economic life, for example. So Martin Heidegger, the old German philosopher, the guy who came up with the book Sein und Zeit, Being and Time, he explained our present reality as being one where we have, as he says, revealed reality to be technological, by which he means if you go to a forest, do you see the forest and the trees and the life that is there? Or do you see rather resources, materials? Oh, we can cut this tree down and turn it into an IKEA table. So seeing the world there, outside there, as basically resources and materials for technology, and technology being in itself a sort of means to an end in a way that we use technology in order to create other things, to say comfort. We want to have the comfort of easy travel, and we want to have the comfort of a modern house with all these electronic gadgets in it. I remember in the 1980s, husbands started buying their wives microwaves and washing machines and dishwashers. And yeah, this kind of like freed women from household labor, even though the men were still very much occupied from 9 to 5, doing all sorts of labor, working for technology so that the technology could liberate women. Funny how now feminists today accuse men of somehow being male supremacists who hate women, want to oppress women, when clearly in the Western world for the past 50 years, all men have been doing is making machines and gadgets and technology and the services around it in order to free women from the kitchen and the household labor. So she doesn't have to spend 3 hours a day cooking or 3 hours a day cleaning clothes. Before washing machines, you had to manually clean your clothes by, scraping them against a rock or some other kinds of rack, right? With hot water over and over and over again to get the stains out. You don't need to do that anymore. It's also the reason why a lot of our modern clothes are much more refined than they used to be. Because if you consider the way that you had to clean clothes against a rock or something, that would have caused a lot of wear and tear. So your clothes would have had to have been very sturdy, made of sturdy materials. That also lasted very long. Clothes would last you 20 years. You would buy a jacket, you would wear it for 20 years. Nowadays, jackets that you buy are made of fluff. You could never scrape them against a rock to clean them because you'd destroy them. They're made of, I don't know, polyester. All right. Okay, so we've liberated women with technology, but then Heidegger says no, technology isn't just a means to an end. Technology is also the way we reveal the world to ourselves, namely as everything being what he calls standing reserves. I had to brush myself up on what Martin Heidegger actually said about technology, because it's incredibly terse, his academic style, the way he writes and thinks as an academic philosopher is very complex and very hard to understand. It also feels like very aloof, very repetitive sometimes, like you're using really big concepts without, and although he does explain his concepts over and over, it never really touches the concrete, so it feels, right? Only sometimes, some passages in Heidegger's work, you feel like, finally, now I get this. And so Martin Heidegger says, we start treating the whole nature as a standing reserve, material, right? And he warns then in one of his speeches near the end of his life, I think this was in the 1950s possibly, I heard the speech in German, and he warns that the whole world is turned into a giant gas station, that we basically are allowed to use it all up and burn it, right? For whatever reason that we have to do so. And then he says, elsewhere, he also writes that, and then we're going to do that to human beings as well. To give you a really great example of how are we using human beings nowadays as standing reserves for another process? Well, everybody's familiar with the phrase human resources. So when you apply for a job, you go to human resources and they decide whether you are a fit with the company or something, right? So companies already look at people as standing reserves. Do we need this guy? No. Do we need that one? No. Do we need that one? No. Oh, this one has the talents we need. We'll take that one. How much is it? Oh, it's too expensive. We'll get another one. All right. We'll get one from India. Yeah. Human resources, but there's a much, much bigger such process going on where entire nation states and even supra states like the United States, which is basically a federal system, right? Or the European Union start to look at people, especially immigrants, as basically grain that they can move around in silos, right? In containers. So, for example, you can imagine the way NATO looks at human beings. NATO serves itself, of course. NATO is not the highest authority. NATO serves higher authorities, which is basically just individual billionaires and their families who have certain interests. They want to own the world. They want to control everything and maximize their profits off of the whole world. And they want to basically make all human beings customers to their businesses. And they want to have all the businesses serving all of the services. They want to have the supermarkets and the energy companies and the transportation companies and own all of them. So they basically own humanity. And then one day they can say, I own the world. And then they want to have more planets. They want to have Mars as well. Elon Musk wants to populate Mars. Once we start living on another planet, of course, you start selling planets as well. Who can buy Mars? And there's going to be a billionaire who says, I'm going to buy Mars. Like Justin Sun from Tron or something. He's going to buy Mars and do whatever he wants with it. Do you really want to live in that kind of world? Well, we are headed towards such a world. And the example I wanted to give you is NATO then, for example, sees that there are opponents like the Russian Kremlin and Beijing, the Kremlin and the CCP together with Iran or so, maybe Saudi Arabia and some other allies, the BRICS nations perhaps, although India, the I in BRICS, is siding with the West and so on, right? They know they need to sacrifice perhaps tens of millions or hundreds of millions of men fighting the evil enemy, Russia and China. So you're going to have two problems. You're going to burn through a lot of men. Look at Ukraine. They're lowering the military age of conscription, forced conscription. You're not allowed to say no, from 25 to 18, suggesting already that that whole cohort of men from 25 to 40 is basically already wasted to a large degree. And now they need the 18 to 25-year-olds. Very soon, like in Berlin in the later days of the Third Reich, you're going to have 13 and 14-year-olds and girls as well defending the Hitler bunker, and they will all be blasted to shit. And you basically, as what happened in Nazi Germany during the war, 50% of all men ages 15 to 40 was killed in that war. We never talk about it because the other 6 million are somehow more important. But the number of men killed in Germany, the Germanic males, and then that's just Germany. Look at all the men from the Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Sweden, all these countries involved in that massive effort to go east and conquer Russia, right? To the Generalplan Ost, the general plan east, to terraform or colonize Eastern Europe and make it Germanic, right? So many lives lost there. But that's one problem. You're going to lose a lot of men, so you need more soldiers. Just like Hitler actually had alliances with Japan and with even Muslim forces. So all these warring parties have the problem of never having enough soldiers. So where do you get them from? So you get your soldiers from wherever you can get them. It's like Russia is recruiting people from Korea and from Yemeni. They have Yemeni soldiers fighting in Ukraine against us now. Vice versa, of course, Britain is recruiting Nigerians to fight for them. And Britain is recruiting, hopefully, from their perspective, Indians. They want Indians to fight for us, right? So we get the Indians and the Nigerians and Latin Americans, perhaps. Mexicans joining the U.S. Army. How many have joined? Many. I think, how many white guys are there still left in the U.S. Army? Is it like 40%, 60%? I think it's 40%. So they're getting mercenaries from all over the world. Whoever will fight for $2 an hour, right? It's not going to be tall, blonde Aryan types who will not fight for $2 an hour and then get killed. No. So you need more soldiers, and you need men to replace the men lost after. Even if you win the war, you're going to have men to run the economy, or women to run the economy. It doesn't matter what sex it is. It matters. You need them. You need more people in. And so NATO has this luminous idea. They're just going to use the whole world, all these people in Africa, all these people in India. They are just, like Heidegger said, standing reserves. Human resources. Human standing reserves, like the trees in a forest waiting for IKEA to turn them into tables. People waiting to be turned into corpses, right? That's what a table is. It's a dead piece of tree. You can be a dead person too one day if you sign up for the army and fight for the glorious leader and kill the evil enemy. And then, of course, you are the one getting killed because you're not the hero in the movie, right? Most men who are sent to the front lines don't return alive. Very few do. And they make movies about the survivors, obviously. And so NATO sees all these people in Nigeria and Africa, maybe Ethiopia as well. They see them as caches of people to be used for their own war effort, for their own technological war machine. We nowadays fight wars with machinery that can kill so many men at once. Ernst Jünger, the other German philosopher, Ernst Jünger, who was also having conversations, and he sent a lot of letters back and forth to Martin Heidegger. They were talking to each other. Ernst Jünger was the World War I veteran hero who survived World War I. And he already described it because World War I was the first war where men used gigantic machines to fight each other. We're not really aware of this, but nowadays we think of war machines as tanks and so on, right? And cars, right? With turrets on top or something. But they had bizarre machines, very large cannons, very large mobile cannons, obviously, right? You should try to Google some of these images from World War I, the sort of machines that they were using to fight each other. Bizarre looking, big machines with men all around, like throwing things that could shoot cannons or rockets or explosives or whatever, right? And so World War I was the first machine war, which also meant, according to Ernst Jünger, the loss of heroism. There was no more heroism in being a soldier. There were no more real man-to-man combats where the best man won or something, where the most skilled man won. And this already started, of course, the loss of skill in fighting started with the invention of the handgun and the rifle. Because almost anybody who has a functional trigger finger can fire a pistol or fire a revolver or fire some other kind of weapon, right? The skill from, say, going from sword duels where two men had to be skilled in sword fighting in order to survive, to pulling a trigger, that is a massive transition, a massive loss of talent and ability, right? And heroism, to simply being a guinea pig getting shot at, right? And so that started with World War I. There were no real man-to-man combats anymore. Rarely, of course, Ernst Jünger describes one scene where he's in the enemy's trenches and they are in close combat now, but still shooting at each other. And then he meets this, whoever it is, French guy. The French guy is reaching for his pistol, and Ernst Jünger had lost his. He was out of ammo, notices something hanging on the wall. I think it was another pistol, grabs it, and then shoots the Frenchman and barely survives because he was just an inch quicker. Right, and so heroism was rare in World War I and absent in World War II, basically, because you're just people in trenches shooting at each other. Like, look at what is happening in Ukraine. Your enemy doesn't even see you because you're getting a drone in your face. It explodes, right? I've seen some footage of what happens to you when a drone, for example, blows up just behind your back. Your clothes are ripped off, your skin is ripped off, and basically exposes your heart, but your heart is still throbbing even though your face is down in the mud. Horrible stuff. So the machine wars that we have now, what are they good for? It's literally a meat grinder now. You're just throwing men into the meat grinder and killing them off. These rockets from afar blasting hundreds of guys to death in one blow. You know, you can't even see your enemy anymore, and so also nobody feels responsible anymore. So with this rise in technological warfare and basically the rise of technological society comes the loss of responsibility. There's no immediate emotional connection to your enemy anymore, right? Then why do we do it? Now, Heidegger says we do all this. The whole society is geared toward technology because technology offers power. Those who wield the latest technology, military technology, wield the power over others so you can kill them or force them into submission, right? And so in this podcast episode, I'll post it to my website, jmk.info, and to my YouTube at the Great Johannes. It got me thinking, like Heidegger near the end of his life was working with some of his students to devise a whole new way of revealing reality, no longer as merely everything being there as materials, as standing reserves for a technological process, where we are literally being consumed by machines at some point, right? But rather that we become aware of the fact that technology can be dangerous and is to an extent is simply dangerous. For example, like I explained, the loss of responsibility, the loss of heroism in the combat and so on, it makes everything mechanical and everything becomes a bureaucracy dealt with a pen stroke. Some general somewhere signs off on some order and 10,000 men die who never met each other. They didn't even meet their general, right? And so Heidegger starts to work on this concept, which I think in another speech he called Gelassenheit. It is the will not to will. It's like let live and let die. Gelassenheit, I don't know how to translate it into English. It's something like let live and let die-ism. Let live and let die as an attitude, where I don't quite know what Heidegger meant to achieve by it, but certainly he meant to let go of this technological society, and so that we human beings stop being mere matter, mere gears in a machine, but that there may be other forms of life. So what Heidegger is really alluding to, which is maybe hard to grasp, he says that this reality, as we revealed it to ourselves as being technological and everything is just a standing reserve, is just one way that reality may be revealed. And you can do it in many other ways. And that may be difficult to grasp for us, is that we human beings as a species in the last 200 years or so, since the industrial age really kickstarted first in Britain and very quickly also in Germany, is simply our own choice. We decided to do all this, even though it seems so real to us. And like, this is how life is lived. You go to school, you become a standing reserve for your corporation. You're just a gear in a machine. That's how life is done. And what do you mean creativity? And what do you mean thinking for yourself? It's just follow orders. Just do what the manager says. The manager's chief, his boss, he knows what to do. He knows what we're all doing. No. The bosses, the CEOs of big companies, they work for shareholders. And shareholders can be a very dispersed, diverse group if you have very many, but usually there's also a clique of billionaires who own most shares, right? They have just personal interest. They just have that will to power, and all of us are running after those billionaires. Please give me more money. Please give me a raise so I can make $50 an hour instead of $40 an hour, and you still won't be able to afford a house, right? Why do we do it? So that is a choice. It's simply a choice. The problem, though, today is that with 8 billion people in the world, with, 220 million people living in Nigeria, 3 times the population of Germany, with Africans using the internet now with their cell phones, coming online on TikTok, seeing everything that everybody else is doing and demanding their share of it, right? Greed and envy are extremely powerful emotions for anybody, Imagine the Germanic warriors of 2,000 years ago, if they were given cell phones to look at TikTok 2,000 years from now, seeing all the things we would be doing. The general attitude is that some of them would dismiss it and reject it, but a lot of them would fall for it. Like a lot of them would be lured into that commercial advertising world, and they would want stuff. They would start desiring material possessions, just as we have fallen for all of this, right? I desire to have this nice microphone because it's good for my voice, right? But to desire all this technology all the time as a sort of substitute for a totally different kind of being in the world is clearly deeply problematic. So Heidegger comes up with Gelassenheit, the will not to will, not the will to power or the will to meaning. Those are references to Nietzsche, of course. But the will not to will, like I don't have to do any of those, right? And I think then it is certainly possible to change how we reveal reality to ourselves. Like I said, this may sound far-fetched because, shouldn't we just do what Elon Musk says, to make life multiplanetary? Or what I think Heidegger would answer to that is, why don't we organize this planet so that we don't need a multiplanetary species, right? Then we don't need multiple planets. Like, it is, of course, an expression of greed. Like, this planet is not enough for me. I want more. I want another planet. That is an expression of the billionaire greed that Musk himself also suffers from, right? Whether you like it or not. All these stories about, Star Wars and Star Trek and Dune and so on are expressions of dissatisfaction with what we have here on Earth. Then why don't we make Earth first something that satisfies us? Well, then you might not be interested in science fiction anymore. And I think that would have been the angle Heidegger was on to. Speaking of Dune, I read half the book. I never finished it. I read the first half of the original Dune book. And so I don't quite know everything about it, obviously. But I do know there's this spacing guild with the navigators who use this substance called spice that gives them precognitive abilities and allows them to develop a massive mind so that they can then use their powers to fold space and help ships travel. But I've heard that in the Dune universe, there's also considered what they call no ships or NO ships that do not require a navigator at all, but rather have a very intricate system of calculations, basically computers and calculations that can do the same thing, can also travel through space, but without the need of a navigator. And so the navigator, the Spacing Guild, then lost some of its power, its monopoly, and had to share it now with these others using the no ships. If I pronounce it correctly, even I don't even know if I'm, talking out of my. But the thing here is this juxtaposition between, on the one hand, the mind-focused, basically magicians. The navigators are magicians, right? Using mental powers to shape the world, the reality, vis-a-vis the technologists, the calculators of the no ships who use machines and computers to do the same thing. That is the conflict of our time. In fact, this is based on something in the real world that we all know about. It is actually the conflict between Catholicism, Christian Catholicism, and Christian Protestantism. That is because of the following. Catholicism has its roots basically in the ancient Egyptian modes of thought and religions, which are based on magic, right? The Catholic Church never denied the existence of magic. The reason why the Catholic Church went after the heathens and started burning heathen seeresses and prophetesses at the stakes is because they believed those women and those heathens possessed magic. And the Catholic Church wanted to create a monopoly on magic for itself by rooting out all other religions, right? Now comes Protestantism. But what does Protestantism do? Protestantism in those days when it started had fewer people than Catholicism. Catholics were a far larger group. Protestantism is a small group. Protestants are like the Northwest European types, the Nordic types, and the English, of course, the Anglo, but they're small in number. So this is why the Anglo in England, the Anglo-Protestants, come up with this vision for technology, because technology is a way to achieve certain goals with fewer people. Technology makes human labor more efficient. It amplifies your labor ability. For example, instead of having 20 men dig a canal, you build a digger machine that does the work of 20 men, right? So So it comes down also, it is technology, by the way, is a form of magic, but it is it's a style of magic where you remove the spirit from the object you're working with. A digging machine itself has no spirit or mind attached to it anymore. It is simply a material contraption that you, as a spirited human being, can operate to do the work of 20 men. And so this is how Protestantism was able to become so important. Why the USA, for example, was mostly founded by Protestant Christians. They were, of course, chased out of Europe by Catholic armies. For example, the Spanish Catholic army at one point sent 10,000 soldiers to the Netherlands to root out the Protestants. And so the Protestants were forced into the USA. Many of them also went to South Africa. So basically, the Protestant Christians founded the European colonies abroad. They were the Northwest type Europeans, the Nordic types, Nordic Germanic, Germanic and Anglo-Saxon. So that's why Australia, South Africa, and the USA, when you look at the white population, it's that Germanic type, that Aryan type of people, because they were the Protestants, right? I was born and raised in the south of the Netherlands, just on the border of where people are Catholic. So I happen to be Catholic. And this thing between Catholicism and Protestantism is really, like in Dune, a conflict between magic and technology. But technology is a form of magic in the sense that you use your mind to create tools that make you more efficient. All right, where are we headed with this podcast? It's becoming a little bit of a cult, right? But so the Protestants then are able, for example, to do a lot of efficient work without having to rely on slaves. The Catholic system relied basically on serfs and to some extent slaves. The Muslim world did too. The Muslim world was even less efficient than the Catholic world, and the Muslim world relied basically just on slave labor. Basically, almost all of their people were treated as slaves, right? And what goes wrong then is, of course, when I noticed that the Protestants, of course, at some point, start bringing slaves over to the USA and use them as well. But overall, the thing with what Protestantism kickstarted is, of course, the British Industrial Age, which was then later tried in Germany as well, also under the influence of the Protestants. Right? For example, the Philips company in the Netherlands that moved to Eindhoven. Eindhoven is basically in the heart of a Catholic Dutch sphere, but Philips was Protestant, and he brought over a lot of his Protestant engineers to start building the Philips company. You know, the Philips light bulb company, and now Philips medical supplies. Maybe you own a Philips TV. And so you see that it's actually the Protestant mind that is more in tune with creating technology to work, right, to become more efficient. I'm looking for a way to work toward ending this podcast episode because they shouldn't be too long. It's almost 30 minutes or so already. So what I mean by this is the conflict between Catholic magic and Protestant focus on technology, despite the fact that the Protestants also brought over plenty of slaves. And now, of course, we're moving in massive hordes of immigrants, right? While at the same time, we're supposed to be becoming more technologically efficient. An example would be just 20 years ago, a lot of cashiers in the Netherlands were Muslim women. Now they're almost gone. That's because the cashiers were replaced with self-checkout machines. Now all of a sudden we don't need these immigrants anymore. But we still need immigrants to be consumers, right? In some way. So this is a very odd thing that in the Western world, in the Anglo-American sphere plus Western Europe, we are still increasing our technological efficiency. We need fewer people for these jobs, but we are at the same time importing more and more people because we need buyers for our homes, right? We need consumers. We are trying to tie the consumers to ourselves, and of course, strategically, right? Under the NATO influence, we are thinking of killing off 100 million European men in a war against Russia. We need 100 million replacements. That's what they're here for. They're here to replace us, literally. All right, but then how do we escape this? Maybe this is how I will try to finish this podcast episode is, how do we escape now then the need for technology where we basically have made ourselves standing reserves to serve the interests of individual billionaires, really, who simply have a weird, warped psychology where they are simply extremely greedy, psychopaths who live by the will to power model. They just want to own the world and then Mars and then Venus as well. If that's their attitude, all right, then there needs to be a way for us ordinary citizens to walk away from that. That we begin to become conscious of this problem. That we realize that this push for technology, turning the whole world into a giant gas station, burning everything, so to speak, for the personal interest of several people that we don't even know, have never met, all right? How do we free ourselves from this? How do we free ourselves from this? Is that I think what we might need to do is to rebalance. Technology is now extremely dominant, and we balance it back with, say, spiritual inwardness, or what we might call magic, right? I want to explain that modern science evolved out of the occult spheres. It worked like this. Basically, at one point, say 16th century Europe, everybody who tried to do something was basically an occultist, right? And from these occult groups, there were some who wanted to find a way to do away with the emotional and the sensory and focus strictly on what they perceived as logic. So the word technology comes from Greek, techne logos. Techne is like reason, logos is the words, or basically by way of reasoning logically, all right? They wanted to remove, so to speak, the spirits from their thinking and have pure logical thought that is no longer infused with emotions or feelings and sensations and so on, right? And so that is what modern science also says. They want to remove the human observer from their data or from their processes and their methods, right? So that idea of removing then the human factor from what they're working on became modern science. But it evolved out of an occult sphere, right? It was born of occult groups, and they simply tried to remove something. What you get then is, I was speaking about that digging machine that does the work of 20 men. What is that really? That is a materialization of logical thought processes that you have materialized in the real world. In a sense, that is magic, right? In order to basically store your logical process routines in the form of the machinery and the way it works, right? Logically, right? Technologically, right? And then use that as a tool to dig men's graves where you can bury the dead that you lost in war. Yeah, I think I can't really, there's something there. Sometimes I feel like, if I were just a little bit more intelligent, I could just look over the edge of a mystery and then see the answer that I'm really trying to get at. So I'll try a little bit more. I think us human beings need to realize that in the end, the direction of our whole reality was our own choice, and we have therefore the power to choose another direction. I hope any of this made sense.